So welcome to the Digital Economist from the World Economic Forum here in Davos, Switzerland. We are holding our inaugural roundtable and very excited to have a huge turnover and a highly curated roundtable. The Digital Economist is an impact platform focused on thought leadership and bringing investable opportunities in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals to the fore. So we're very excited to welcome folks on January 23rd this evening, and looking forward to great partnership and a lot of value we create for the community along the way. So welcome. Welcome everyone. My name is Navroop Sahdev and welcome back to the season 2 of the Digital Economist Speaker Series. I'm the founder CEO of the Digital Economist, which is a global impact platform focused on building the product, services, and knowledge pieces towards a human-centered digital economy. And we have a young, dynamic scientist, scholar with us today. Vanessa, I can't say your last name, so you have to forgive me, but you have to tell us yourself how you say it. She is a senior product design and materials engineer. That's a mouthful right there at Apple. And she's very smart and she's doing a lot of cool things. So Vanessa, welcome. We're so excited to have you today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here as well. Great. This is a great platform you've got, and I'm excited to dive in deeper with you today. So
Absolutely.
My name is Vanessa. My last name is Eguavoen. It's Nigerian. It's pronounced phonetically. No worries there. And then, do you want me to sort of give a background of myself, or?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, I'm a chemical engineer. I studied chemical engineering at UCLA. And after that, I got my master's and my PhD in chemical engineering as well at Caltech. And I specifically focused in a material science lab. I worked on solid acid fuel cells, understanding electrocatalysis in solid acid fuel cells. And since then, I worked as a process engineer at Lam Research, where I was working on, sort of cutting edge solutions to develop plasma processes that make, all the chips that run a lot of the electronics that we use in our day to day. They make the semiconductor processing equipment at Lam. And after that, I worked for about 2 years at Apple in the display organization. So liquid crystal displays, a little bit of OLED displays, working on delivering display solutions for our products. And now I'm sort of reverting back to my engineering roots, working as a materials engineer on our Apple products as well.
Fantastic. So you've said a lot of things, Vanessa, which kind of went over my head, but it sounds super technical. So that's so interesting. I know you care deeply about diversity in STEM, but before we kind of dive into how critical that is, with all these conversations we're having, so we met on Clubhouse, for those in the audience who don't know, and this is the first connection through Clubhouse that we brought to the speaker series, so we're very excited. But tell us a little bit more about, actually. We usually line up speakers well in advance. I've been on the app for, I guess, close to a month now, although, of course, there are a few days I engaged and others not quite. But yeah, there will be more. You're the first, but you certainly won't be the last, is what I can say. Vanessa, tell us a little bit more about your story. And maybe towards the end of it, we can also talk about some Clubhouse jazz.
Okay. All right. So, like I said, I'm an engineer. I moved to I've been in the United States since I was about 16 and a half. Before that, I've lived in, I was in the UK right before I came to the United States. And before that, I was in Nigeria. And before that, I was in Belgium. So I've lived in Europe and Africa and now in the United States. And, you know, sort of when I moved to the United States, I had the goal of being an engineer. I actually wanted to go to UCLA for undergrad. And I knew that I wanted to go to either Caltech or MIT for grad schools. I was very, you know, focused and determined, and I was clear what I wanted to do. And I think I usually tell people this and they're shocked. And I say, like, the first time I ever sort of experienced external doubt in my capabilities was in the United States. And I remember,
Wow.
you know, yeah, I remember coming, like, registering at the local college. So because I had, you know, sort of varying transcripts from different countries and the cost of being international, I was just like, okay, I will start in a community college and then transfer. So my uncle gave me that advice. And so I remember going there and saying, oh, I want to go to UCLA or Berkeley, you know, I want to go to UC for engineering. What are the courses I need to take? And I remember the guidance counselor looking at me saying, like, you know, the education system in the United States is very tough. People come here and they have high expectations. You know, I don't want you to be disappointed. So let's shoot for a Cal State. So she basically said that, like, you know, let's shoot. I remember those words, let's shoot, because it was very clear to me that she had assessed me and decided that I might be biting off more than I could chew. So she wanted to give me a different set of courses to take that would prepare me to transfer to a Cal State school and, like, you know, not get too excited or, you know, I not get too excited about transferring to UC. And I remember just thinking, like, just laughing about it and just saying, like, no, like, don't worry. Like, how about you give me a test to test, like, my calculus or, you know, whatever you want to test to make sure I am qualified. She didn't even want to give me the chances to take the courses, not to, you know what I mean? Like, this is not that I took the courses that I was failing and I was trying to apply. She, like, you know, she was just saying, like, take a different set of courses, go back to math 1 and math 2 or something. I don't remember how, and the specific course names. So yeah, so I had to go back like a few times and meet another counselor who I had to convince to allow me to take the test that would place me in the college level classes that would prepare me for UCs. And of course I took the test, did well, you know, and got into the classes. But I remember that story because I think it was the first time in my journey in my career so far that someone told me that, hey, are you sure this is what you want to do and can you do it? And, you know, every time I've sort of met that resistance, it's always taken, you know, sort of reaching back to that well of confidence in myself and trying to, like, find that to keep fighting, if that makes any sense, and keep fighting for my place and keep fighting for a chance.
Yeah, wow. I mean, what a crazy story. And so you think this has to do with, I want to dive a little bit deeper into this because I think so many of us face similar things. And we think it's about us, but it's the story of so many of us, right? And I think that has also sort of become clear with new media, for example, like Clubhouse, or the conversations that are going on. Of course, you and I have a lot of work on our plate, so we've been chatting about how is it people who are there all the time. But you know, I think there is that conversation that's pending, right? Do you think it has to do with being female, being an immigrant, being a woman of color? What is it that in your sort of assessment, sort of looking back, not to own that attitude or bias, right, in any way or justify it, but what's, you know, when you talk about the first time you doubted your capabilities coming to the US, I mean, I want to say slightly similar story where I didn't feel like gender wise, I was, you know, this sort of consciousness that, you know, oh, I'm a woman. This happened to me when I actually moved to the United States myself in 2015. In Europe, and when I was a student, and, you know, there were all these other things, as competition, collaboration, blah blah blah, but it didn't feel like I was being singled out just because I'm a woman. But that happened here, so I relate to that, and I just want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into kind of how your thinking evolved, and as you kind of look back at those experiences, what are some of the takeaways, and what is it that that has to change?
So it's difficult for me to, you know, go back to different instances and figure out what exactly that person was thinking in that situation. I mean, and I think the onus is not on me to rationalize their bias, if that makes sense, or to try to understand their bias. And it took me a while to stop trying to, because I realized I started trying to change myself. This is when I was much younger, change myself to, to go down the path of least possible resistance. So if I needed to dress a certain way or talk a certain way or present myself a certain way so that I could just start at a reasonable level and minimize unconscious bias, I would. And it was taxing on me. And it took, some time to sort of own myself and stop trying to mold myself into a person that would have the easiest time of it, if that makes any sense. And so, at that point, maybe, at the very beginning, I would say, of my academic career, it could have been that I, didn't have, a diploma from a school she recognized. And it could be my race. It could be the fact that I was a girl. And I was deciding that I wanted to go to, a very competitive UC system. All of those things are possibilities. And it's hard for me to understand it. And when I say that, like, I hadn't experienced bias before coming here, I had experienced bias, but a different kind of bias. In where I was born in Belgium, my dad was a soccer player. That's why he moved there from Nigeria at a young age. And I remember the reason why we had an okay time in our small town was because my dad played soccer. So of course if we were with him, we got treated differently because, oh, that's the, get soccer player kind of thing. I remember my mom saying she had trouble even getting a nurse to, like, give me a bath after I was born. Like, the nurse wouldn't want to touch me or help me because she had never sort of maybe interacted with a Black person before. And when my dad shows up and all the things and then talks to the manager, then it becomes a whole thing. The treatment changes, and it happened a lot. And, like, for example, in the UK, there's this model minority myth in the United States, especially in California, where certain minority groups are expected to perform well in math and sciences. In London, the model minority, Nigerians are part of that model minority. So if you say you're Nigerian, you're not going to get that feedback where people don't think you're not good at math or science. They expect you to either be in engineering or be going to medical school. So it's biased in a different way. So then when I came here and people just expected that I didn't know anything, I was, like, shocked by that because, I had other experiences, not to say that those were any better or certain continents were less, biased or things like that. It's just bias changes depending on the culture, depending on the group. And, the United States has a different history with, Jim Crow laws, slavery, systemic oppression of certain groups, that racial relations are different and stereotypes are different. The model minority is different. All of these things are different. And you just, when you show up in a place and you are, a minority in so many different ways, you have to figure out, okay, how do I understand this landscape and how do I try to succeed in this landscape? And that's what that was something that was challenging for me, and I felt like I had to figure out. And I remember sort of last year even having some kind of epiphany, when after the George Floyd murders, and there was a lot of conversations about race, a lot of conversation about systemic oppression. And I remember writing an article where I wrote that I was upset with myself in a way, that I had decided to, like I mentioned before, mold myself to succeed, even if someone was, someone decided that they were going to underestimate me because they felt that, like, I was the only Black girl around and maybe I wasn't meant to be there. And why was I there? Was I the service person, or am I this engineer? I've walked into meetings like that, and in any time in that case, I decided to sort of use that as my superpower And instead of holding, systems or people accountable, I just decided to figure out how I could beat the system. I wasn't trying to fight the system or change the system. And I had to decide that, like, this is not okay, because even if I'm battered and bruised and I just make it, not a lot of people can survive this kind of system. And if we don't change the system, we're going to have a case where, for example, in my PhD program, in my major in chemical engineering, I believe I was the first Black woman to graduate. And I had to jump through all kinds of hoops, go through all kinds of things to prove myself worthy. And if someone else decided that they didn't want to do that and dropped out, is it their fault when, other people didn't have to go through the same thing and were able to graduate? I don't think so. Why do you have to be exceptional to be average, because you're different? True equality is that we all have the same level of mediocrity. And so I decided, I kind of had an epiphany last year and decided that I needed to start holding systems accountable, holding my friends accountable, holding whatever corporation I interact with. If I'm working for you, spending business with you, associating with you, I would try to hold the system accountable and not just think about how I can make it out of the system, think about how I can personally make it out of the system, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, wow. I'm almost speechless, Vanessa, to a lot of things that you shared, and I think and you shared them as a matter of fact in many ways, but I can imagine how much things like that can enrage anyone and entire communities. And I think what you just said really stood out for me around that you don't have to be exceptional just to be average. And I think that is the kind of burden that's that minorities, quote unquote, which is majority if you look at the population of the world, really have to bear, to be in places where traditionally there haven't been too many spaces. And so, Vanessa, I kind of want to go a little bit deeper into your passion, right, which is science, and we'll come back to insights that you shared, and I think what that means for the next decade or the next few decades in a second. But tell us about what sparked your interest in chemical engineering, and how did you pick your majors? And I think there are gems in that story there as well, is what I'm guessing for a lot of other girls and girls of color who want to follow that path.
Right. So, like I mentioned, I'm Nigerian. So even though I'm European citizenship, like my culture is Nigerian. And growing up, I believe I was a very curious child. And so I never really knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew that I was good at math, I was good at science. I thought airplanes were interesting because we always traveled when we were probably I got on my first flight when I was less than a year old. My dad played professional sports, so we traveled a lot. And so I was always interested in airplanes, cars, just mechanics. And so I think I first just said I was going to be an aerospace engineer so I could work on airplanes and travel for free for the rest of my life, even though I wasn't really sure what it meant. But, so it's just what I told myself. And I didn't really have, neither of my parents were academics, so they didn't have answers to a lot of the questions that I had. I had to sort of reach outside to extended family. My mom had a cousin who was an aerospace engineer, and he would buy me little model planes and said, oh yeah, you should go for it, you're good at math. But then he would say, oh, maybe if you wanted to have a family, don't do aerospace, do another engineering because you would travel too much. So he was already sowing those seeds of doubt. And my mom would be like, maybe you should try another engineering if you want to have a family. That's not really the reason I switched from aerospace, actually. In college, I had an extra course on my schedule. So I took, I didn't need organic chemistry, but I just took it anyway because I just had, 5 units and there was no other course to take for my major. And I remember I did really well at it. And my professor, and this is another thing, for good or for bad, when I would always stand out, of course, if I came into the class. Like I look like me, I'm the only Black girl. So the teacher would, of course, would notice me. And it was always funny to me how their interest in me changed after the first midterm. And that was the same in this course. I think the first midterm, I don't know, maybe got 100% or something. And then he calls me, he's like, so where are you from? What do you do? Like, you're smart. What's your deal? And I mean,
Wow.
he wouldn't have asked that if it was someone else, but I always got this question. If I ever did like well in a test, but he meant well. And so I said, oh, I don't know. I think I want to do aerospace engineering, but I'm just taking this because and he's like, oh, well, have you thought of you're really good at chemistry. Maybe you could do like pre-med or, go to medical school. Like, I think you'd be really good at this. You're really good at OChem, and not a lot of people does this come easily to, especially if they're not like interested in it. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. So the OChem was 2 courses. And before the next course, he recommended that I do like apply for a research internship at UCLA. So I was still in community college at this point. So I had him write me a letter, and I went, of course, to that research internship, and I worked in a chemistry lab. And I had a great time with with that advisor. I had fun for that summer. And I was like, okay, this is perfect. I definitely want to go to UCLA, and I want to keep, working on experiments, because I just liked working with my hands and building things and doing stuff. And so at that point, I'd already started switching, like maybe I will do a different kind of engineering, because I still felt like I wanted to be an engineer, not just a pure scientist. And so I took the chemistry courses and, applied for chemical engineering, and I got it. And so his interest definitely sort of geared me in a different direction, but then I started learning more about chemical engineering, and I liked it. I realized later on, though, that chemical engineering is really very much not chemistry. It's more math and physics, but I didn't know, right? So it's just me being, asking questions and being influenced here and there. I didn't even have a clear idea what chemical engineering was. I was just like, well, this teacher says I'm really good at chemistry. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking maybe aerospace is not for me because, it's too much traveling, which is not true, by the way. My uncle was wrong. Like, aerospace doesn't really have anything to do with traveling. So, and my mom also, like, not knowing and giving me the wrong idea. And so basically it just speaks to when you don't have like good mentors and you're trying to figure it out and you're trying to understand the landscape, and you're just getting tidbits from here and there. So I feel like I stumbled into it, but I was still, I felt like I was good at it, and I ended up falling in love with it.
Wow, what a story, and I think that there's a lot of lessons there that are applicable to life in general, I think, right? And I guess how often we stumble upon things that become in many ways our life's mission and purpose, right? But
right.
I think one of the lessons that I'm kind of getting as you were just talking is it's also not just the things that interest us, but it's also the things that we know very little about that end up shaping our trajectory. So, just as you were sharing that story.
Yeah, go ahead. You can complete.
Go ahead. No, I'm waiting for you.
Yeah. So like when I started, that like my journey, started taking the courses needed for chemical engineering in community college, I started learning more about what I could do with chemical engineering. And there was a very significant case that was closer to home. And I think, to be honest, that's what sealed the deal with chemical engineering for me. So I think when I wrote my personal statement to UCLA, that's what I actually wrote about. And so Nigeria is a top 10, maybe it's still top 10 oil producing country. So, and the oil rich region is, close to where my father's ethnic background is from. And so it's quite a wealthy region, but it's also a very poor region because, there's lack of regulation until very recently, or accountability on the part of the oil companies when it comes to, sort of burning byproducts or polluting the waterways. And those are communities that depend on the waterways. So there was a lot of conflict in the area, a lot of instability in the area. And I just remember being 16, 17, and just having a clear idea of how bad if once you've seen it with your eyes, it changes you. Having a very clear idea of how bad the status of the environment is, like how badly we're destroying our environment with oil exploration. And I think everybody in the United States remembers the BP oil spill that happened a few years ago. And what I like to tell people is, like, when you think about how much oil was spilled in the United States and how big a news story that was, that amount is spilled almost every few days in that region, and no coverage, nothing whatsoever. And there's some coverage, but you have to seek it out. You have to seek out the news. You have to seek out to understand the devastating impact. And it's not just Nigeria, Venezuela, Ecuador, every other place that is
India.
not quote unquote a Western society with different regulations is going through this. And so I was very passionate at that point, and I said chemical engineering is the best path for me to work on, or at least study energy and clean energy solutions. So in undergrad, I worked on solar cell work with a professor, and in grad school, I worked on fuel cells. So that's what pushed me in that direction. I think it solidified for me that if I could ever come back and do something about energy policy, I would need a chemical engineering degree anyway, not necessarily an aerospace degree. So that's what sealed the deal for me, if that makes any sense at the end of the day.
Amazing. Yeah. So really your interest in sustainability, and I mean, you sound like an environmentalist to me, which is great. And I think we all need to be environmentalists. Like, I started my career working at the UN Environment Program. That was my very first internship. And ever since, anywhere I put my bio, I like add one word environmentalist to it.
Yeah.
And I think, just like you shared, Vanessa, you see that destruction, not the scale, and not the oil in particular, which is just horrendous, honestly, even just from the sound of it. But yeah, the pollution, the poverty, the inequality sort of coming from India, and how much destruction is going on. And a lot of this, again, is, trying to chase that Western model of development without regard for resources that did exist. The relationship with natural resources, with the planet, with other beings is very different in Eastern, and I think Africa in many ways, Latin cultures as well. It's really just that, I think, the more European, and then of course through that colonization of North America, cultures that kind of have a kind of very hierarchical, and it's a big statement to make here, but I mean, I guess historically speaking, that wasn't always the case, right? So, Vanessa, you talked a lot about, in depth about chemical engineering. I just kind of want to explore a little bit deeper the tie between chemical engineering and environmental sustainability. So say you were to be interviewed for the advisor to the president. And you know what you know, right? And I would also encourage everybody who's joining us here and the attendees to post their questions for Vanessa. Yes, you're absolutely right, Bakar. She's awesome. So share away your questions, and we'll take them without delay. But yeah, Vanessa, to that, like, what is it that, from a more policy perspective, needs to change? And of course, the media coverage, the kind of the U.S. centricity, not just within the U.S. but also around the world, is a massive issue, and has caused the world and costed the world a lot of problems. But what would you say, from a more policy perspective, the key things that we need to change towards a better future?
That's the $1 million question, and I think it's individual agency. I think when it comes to, first of all, just violation of regulations, clearly somebody on the part of any of these companies is getting away with this because they're not being held accountable by the local government. And how does that work? bribery, lobbying, all of these corrupt systems that are in place to allow, the little people just always lose out. And it's really unfortunate. It's really sad, and it's a constant struggle to figure out, because everyone asks this question every year, like, why isn't there, constant electricity, or why aren't we taking advantage of the natural fossil fuels, or sunlight, for example, is another, in the southern hemisphere is abundant. And we already know, even just from the United States, that you can have significant solar energy. So there are possibilities. There are routes to change. It's about getting the right leadership in place, the leadership that will not just be consider the interests of the companies, but consider the interests of the people. And that's difficult. That's difficult in colonized nations, that there's always been an instability of power from the get-go. From the get-go, you've had power given to a smaller group that the United Kingdom decided would get military power, and then the groups that had the natural resources were stripped of power. And so it's caused this conflict that is long-standing, that is the perfect recipe for exploitation by the West. So if we can't even fix the long-standing inherited issues of colonialism, how can we even move forward to say, like, how can we run this country in an efficient manner that benefits every single tribe involved? I mean, Nigeria alone has 250 tribes and languages. So basically, a foreign entity decided to create a country of completely different people, and then give power strategically to continuously destabilize the country. So that's the main issue. There isn't even proper governance. So how can a non-functioning government properly interact with a corporation whose goal is to maximize profits and minimize losses? So if they see that they can just get away with whatever they want and grease whoever's palm is in charge, they're going to continue to do that. And that's unfortunate, because even the corporations themselves have zero agency. Like, whoever's the CEO or whoever's working there, their employees, I'm not sure, they don't have the agency to actually hold themselves accountable and do the right thing either. So it becomes this catch-22. It's like, who's supposed to do the right thing first? And then you have the people just waiting for a solution, and it's just constant, and it's going on and on and on. And I mean, I know this happens in a lot of countries. Ecuador is also going through the same thing. I don't know if anyone here has watched that documentary with I believe it was ExxonMobil. There are so many countries where the people are trying to take these oil companies to court and get some accountability and get some reparations for the damage done, but they don't have the resources or the backing from the World Court to get justice. And it's unfortunate. I think that there is, although, a shift in the youth, especially in Nigeria. There's been a lot of protests last year, a lot of awakening in the diaspora, and a lot of people are coming together to figure out, how do we throw away these old forms of government, these old corrupt forms of government, and make sure we establish a government that's for the people and by the people, and stop this legacy of corruption. Because if we continue the way we're continuing, I don't see a solution. There's just no path forward. It's very scary and very sad.
And I'm angry as I'm hearing this. Yeah,
I'm
is
angry
scary
too, and it's very scary, and it's very, very sad. I think that anger and that sadness and that rage is necessary. And I think last year has been sort of an awakening for the entire world. We've seen protests in every country. I mean, even Russia is having protests currently, so everybody is starting to be awakened to social injustice. And one of my biggest passions and what my biggest prayers is that fervor doesn't die down after this pandemic, and after things go back to normal, like we're all wishing they go back to, that people still continue to hold unjust systems accountable and continue to speak up and fight for what's right. There's been a lot of discourse I've seen online. I've seen, people like youth coalitions coming together, groups coming together to figure out how do we do away with these systems that have not served us since independence in 1960. So in the 1960s, most African countries got their independence, and they're still struggling because, like I mentioned, every country is strategically destabilized. Like, I was following the news in Uganda, like a benevolent dictator just got, elected again, like almost 8 years or something, a ridiculous amount of years in a row. And these are like backed by Western countries. So it's like the Western countries are aware of, countries that have benevolent dictators. But if the relationship is fruitful, or if the relationship is fruitful for the Western country, they are not going to interfere, but they will only interfere when, it's a negative relationship. And that again is unfair. That's why I'm saying, like, everybody has to have individual agency. If you're in the United States and you're holding your government accountable to do the right thing, do that. If you're in India, hold your government accountable to do the right thing. Participate in grassroots organizations that are making sure that justice is served. And so, like, that's how I started approaching life, is to, wherever I'm living, wherever I can participate, wherever organizations I can support that are fighting injustice, I will. And whenever I have the opportunity to speak up about issues happening that people might not be aware about, I will. And so I think that's what I mean about individual agency, because we cannot keep expecting systems or governments to save us, because the government is comprised of people. Each individual has to take agency in their own government, take agency in their own country, take agency in justice. And I think then we'll have significant change.
I agree. I remember reading this quote. I think it's by one of the very famous French philosophers, and he said, I think it was postmodernism or something, that it's about the perpetual question of the meaning of life, right? And he talked about how through his work, and he doesn't know if there's a meaning to life, but one thing's clear, which is that our job is to love whoever's and whatever's around to love. And I think what you just said is the same thing. And because we love the planet, other beings, care for each other, it also becomes necessary to protect and advocate. I think we all need to be activists, right? And I think that's kind of what you're really saying. It doesn't matter wherever you're local, but then also global, right? Right. Because it is a single interdependent organism, the planet. And from your work, go ahead, Kim.
And my fervor doesn't die with that specific issue. I just meant, that issue spurred my sort of journey in energy work and research. But daily, if it's what's going on in India, if it's what's going on in Yemen, if it's what's going on in Libya, Uganda, I decide to be a student of the world, and not just be performatively activists, but actively decide to participate. If it's money that I can contribute to the cause, if it's exposure I can contribute to the cause, if it's connections, if it's conversations I can have to educate myself about the cause, if I ever become somebody with significantly more power, I understand that I'm not going to get to the pinnacle of my career and not be aware of my surroundings, not be aware of this sort of like the dynamics of power, not be aware of the injustice in the world. And that's, I think, what's missing is a lot of people focus their career on, I want to become a manager, a director, a CEO, whatever, and just do what it takes to keep going up, but they're not aware of their surroundings. They're not aware of their world. And so then you hear a CEO telling you, oh, I didn't know there was such systemic, racism, or there was oppression, or I didn't know this was happening. Oh, we're working on it now. How did you not know? Did you not live on the same planet or in the same environment? Yeah. Last year I was hearing so many C-suite people saying, what? Oh my gosh, there's police brutality. I had no clue. And I was just lost. I was like, this this speaks ill of you if you were really that clueless that you had zero awareness of your surroundings till got to wherever you got to in your company. So I think that's why I'm really excited about the young people who are very passionate. And a lot of people like to make fun of the young people, the teenagers who are, out there fighting and educating themselves and calling them performatively woke. And I'm like, no, they need to be socially aware. So because they're the future CEOs, they're the future inventors. If you're inventing things and you have no clue how your actions affect other people on the other side of the world, you're destroying the planet and you're effectively not moving us forward. And so I think we all need to be agents of change, as well as activists, as well as innovators, as well as inventors.
Absolutely. Wow, that's so well said, Vanessa. I think that's so important, not just for the future generation, but also for us. And then turning around to the current, folks who are sitting in places of power, because I'm not sure it's a lot of innocence. I think there's a degree of not caring, which I guess enrages me further. Saying that, okay, oh, I wasn't sure, I didn't know this police brutality, I didn't know this social injustice. There is some degree of ignorance just because, folks don't take the time to educate themselves. Like right now, like you mentioned, they're the biggest protests in the history of the world that are happening in India. And if it wasn't for some of the celebrities, I think Rihanna and Greta Thunberg and others who posted on Twitter, like, why aren't we talking about this? Like, folks didn't know. Like,
nobody
I have to Google, farmer protests in India to get some news. Even that is just like very wishy-washy and high level, and just not current. It's like 2 days old, but like my mom just called me and told me so many things on the ground.
Most of the article is about Rihanna's tweet. I was reading some article from BBC and it was all about Rihanna. I'm like, are we going to talk about the farmers? Are we going to talk about the protests? Or we're going to talk about the Rihanna versus Modi war? It's blatant.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. It is indeed. And so what would you suggest, Vanessa, in terms of, I guess, strategies, as someone who's so engaged in the world, to educate yourself, educate others, and leave a good legacy behind, and like you said, move all of us forward together?
I think it goes back again to that personal agency. No one can do it for you, and no one's going to spoon feed you the news. No one's going to spoon feed you the research. And if you wait to be spoon fed, you're going to be spoon fed lies. We've seen it, how people can be radicalized over the past few years. If you wait to be fed information by ads or in your sort of echo chamber, you're going to be fed lies and be radicalized and used. So it takes a little bit of work on your part to actually seek the truth. And I like to think of, like, there's something I say is that, like, before we wait for reparations or we wait for, justice from governments, reparations should be individual. So you should think of every interaction you have as a learning experience, an experience to give back, and an experience to either right or wrong if one exists. And it should be in perpetuity. So you should continuously learn about, like Asian, like, so I've been, recently reading about all this like Asian American violence that's going on that nobody's really reporting on, and people are, like older people are being attacked, and there's all this hate related to COVID and all this stuff. And I've been loud about that on my social media. I've been loud about that in my interactions. And all of these people in power, they have people around them. We're social creatures. We all have dinner with somebody. We all have lunch with somebody. We all have conversations. We all have relationships. And you can tell if someone is not taking an issue seriously, even if it's lunch. If someone makes a comment, like tries to, diminish something that's going on, like, if I was on lunch with someone who's like, oh, it's just that one guy, maybe he did something, then you say no, and you hold that person accountable in that, instance. And I think that's what's important, is we need to, sort of approach all of our relationships with that sense of accountability and an agency. And it's the same. If I ever see anything, at my work and anything, any company I work with, any business I work with, if I see an injustice, I will use whatever power I have. If I decide I'm no longer going to spend money with you because you have biased policies, that is a protest. And I let whoever I know or interact with, this is what I'm doing, and hold that company accountable. It might only change 10 people's opinion. I might only reach 10 people, but if 10 people reach another 10 people, if 10, that's what I mean by grassroots. And we can't discount our power. I think a lot of people I talk to decide, well, it's all very difficult. These are huge corporations. You're fighting against a lot of money. It's, we look at it as like individual versus the body. But I think the individuals have a lot of power. If a large number of people make a decision, that impact would be felt. I mean, just look at the stock market with GME and all of that madness that went on in January. That was just people talking together on the internet to make a concerted effort to do something. And they were able to, topple a hedge fund. So we have power. There's collective power for good or for bad. And I think if you use your power for good and just continue doing that, you're doing the best you can. But we shouldn't, diminish our power, and we shouldn't discount our power or our contribution. If you continuously do that, all the people you affect will continuously do that. And it's a chain reaction. And so I've been very, like, that's my mission. And I know that my voice is small now, but I think I'm doing the best with the voice I have. And I will continuously do that. Like, so we met in a clubhouse room where I was, speaking, and I have on my blog, I mentor a lot of young women and men. It's the same. I think we should be raising activists. And I think activists has gotten a sort of bad connotation lately because people think of it as, causing, unnecessarily, they're disturbing the peace. They're being unnecessarily dramatic. And I don't think that's right. I think it's not about deciding to go over and topple a building or topple a business or cause an uproar. It's just about accountability and fighting for what's right. And you can be an activist by just refusing to conform. You don't have to burn a building or take over the Capitol. You can do you can do the right thing. You can make sure the right thing is done for you and for your family. In so many different ways. And I think you can be an activist by contributing to an organization that is fighting hunger. So many ways. And so I like to encourage people to find how they can be agents of change even as small as their circle is. And once they see the positive feedback from that, continue to grow. Because all of these young people who we're all saying don't voice are going to be the future CEOs. And so when they eventually become CEOs, if they have that mindset of positive change and making the world a better place, of course, they're going to gear that $1 trillion company in the right direction. The same people are going to be on the board of directors. The same people are going to be, in the C-suite. If everybody had that mindset and money was not the only mindset, we would have a completely different society. And I know it's difficult, but I don't think there's no reason not to try.
Right. And I think I would just take it a step further, Vanessa. I would say we don't have a choice but to do that because we're destroying our own home. And we don't know how long this is going to go on, it's already underway, right? If you look at Texas,
look at
COVID,
right? And look at what happened, refusing to winterize the system and not even taking accountability for that. I was reading reports that, it was because of wind energy. And I can't even believe anybody would believe that. If you just had a little bit of science education, you would know that it's impossible for wind turbines to cause a snowstorm. So, I mean, that's what it is. The lack of education and then the lack of agency in your own education allows you to be radicalized and fooled. And so some people are going around believing that it's because of renewable energy sources that their roof is falling on their heads, and they're still going to vote against their interests. That's sad. So if you know somebody who knows somebody that can educate them, you do that. You don't say, oh, I'm just going to leave my dumb family members where they are and not try. You try, and you continuously try until you can reach somebody. That's just the way I see it.
Yeah, I think, like, particularly in the US, there's my understanding is a much sort of first of all historic precedence, dependency there for it. I was reading about right after World War II, there was this movement. I forget the name of the organization, Vanessa, but particularly led by women in the southern states of the US to deliberately spread misinformation and instill what is now called the Southern Pride. And they basically told false stories about the heroes, the Civil War, particularly after the 70s, so on and so forth. And they put statues wherever they could in every neighborhood of these folks. And then, the most dangerous thing they did was hijack the school system. So what kids learned. And those are the kids that are the current day adults. These are the people like right now, the stories we read and
the leaders.
Not only, but like folks between their, I guess, 20 to 60-year-old or more right now that are kind of a direct outcome of that. And I think it just shows, on one hand, humans are so resilient and strong and anti-fragile, as we call it. What doesn't kill you make you stronger, but on the other hand, just so vulnerable and susceptible to brainwashing and lies. And I think I'm only mentioning this to say that this is not just like a one-off thing, right? Like if there are people who believe that, okay, the planet you grew up on is Mars, and that's the only reality they know. If you go tell them, oh, actually, you're 40 years old, by the way, this planet is called Earth. It's like, no, what are you talking about? Right? Like there were reports where people who were dying from COVID-19, and we can talk about this, how humans create, of course, pandemics like COVID-19 by stressing other species and ecosystems. But people who are dying on deathbeds, they still don't believe that COVID is real. They think, oh, there's some pneumonia, whatever. It's a hoax, and they're just gonna wake up and it's gonna be fine, and it's the cold and it's gonna go away. And so nurses have been reporting stories like that. So I just feel like it's a much bigger thing, and it's just kind of in our faces, what we previously kind of called the underbelly of the US, where there is, of course, I think Tyler Cohen talked about this the other day. Vanessa, he's of course an economist in Clubhouse, and he said, well, the biggest invention, of course, is the internet. And we know the following, that the internet makes, smart people smarter and stupid people stupider.
That's a good one.
That is. And we grew up thinking, oh, information makes us all smarter. And I just had a moment and I thought, my God, that is so true, right? That information is not always just good, because then if anyone can create information and create false information, then we're in trouble. So, I mean, we talked a lot about, Vanessa, so many of these things, and I feel like you should be an advisor to the president for sure already. And there is obviously hope, and I think digital spaces like the ones we met at are playing an important role. Although I've seen that there's also a lot of dangerous stuff, and it's been hacked, and all the recordings that are in the world, which we kind of anticipated. I wasn't surprised at all by that, talking about Clubhouse. But I want to kind of go back a little bit to the initial spark for this conversation, if you may, and I guess contextualize that a little bit in your current role. So you're part of currently a big corporate, which is Apple, perhaps the most stellar tech company out there. So how do you kind of situate your activism and your strive for a better world within a larger corporate setting? So that's the first part of my question. And the second is, when we talk about diversity in STEM, like what does that mean? And because corporates have so much power in the world, I'm sure you get this question all the time, like how do you, what do you see as the way forward, right? Is it just all upon us? But then, the downside there, like I said, is people have been brainwashed from, the second they were born. Like, how do you tackle that?
I guess I could start with the second question. I think, for any corporation or society, long-term economic growth is tied to scientific advancement. And that advancement relies on a capable workforce. If your workforce is not diverse, inherently, you're not taking full advantage of what you can do. You're not going to be exceeding the possibilities you have if you have monotony in your workforce. And I think this should be clear to everybody and anybody. And it's not just diversity in race or gender, it's diversity of people, cultures, and that is tied to race and gender. And so I think every company, I hope, at least my company, is very, very aware of that. And they're making significant concerted effort to make sure that the workforce is representative of the society. Now, I mean, and this is true for all of I would say all of most of the tech companies, that even if the workforce is diverse to an extent, that diversity is not represented in leadership. And I think that takes holding, leadership accountable and pushing for that change. And I've been vocal about it, and I will continue to be vocal about it. And so I know that a lot of people don't want to just, shake the waters and things like that. But I think what's most important and what I focus on is making sure that I'm doing my best work at my company. I want to make sure that there's there are no faults in what I do. Like, I am working to the highest of my abilities, making sure I beat every expectation and I exceed expectations, so that I do have a voice to make some changes. I always tell other minorities in other companies and, Netflix, Google, that I know it's hard to feel like they have to bear the burden of changing a system and be, competing with their other colleagues who don't necessarily decide to take any agency with a diversity. Not everybody's going to decide to champion diversity if it doesn't necessarily affect, if they don't feel like, they need to, if it doesn't affect them. And so I think first and foremost is just doing my best technical work. And then, of course, merging that with being holding, my leadership accountable. And I'm very, very vocal in that. And my leadership is very responsive. I've been pushing for initiatives like to make sure that we have, relationships with the United Negro College Fund, which sponsors a lot of college students in STEM careers. I've also been pushing for, relationship with the National Society of Black Engineers. So when I was an undergrad, I was very active in NSBE. We didn't have a NSBE chapter in grad school because there aren't that many of us. But, that's a pipeline to minorities who are in engineering. So that's having that direct pipeline helps diversify our workforce. And so that's how I've been trying to make a change, in my company, and continue to advocate for increased retention and hiring of minorities. I also, whenever I have the chance, I participate in a lot of events and try to reach out in my circle if I know anyone, because most companies, we all know we hire via referrals. So if people aren't referring other minorities, they might not be considered. And so I've been actively, searching in my circle and my friends' circle, trying to get that talent pool to make sure that we can do our best work, because we will grow. We will do better work if we have a representative engineering workforce. And so I am committed to that. And I know Apple is committed to that. And I can't speak for Apple, but I'm sure they are. They announced that racial justice initiative last year, where they've started building centers with HBCUs and working with HBCUs to recruit talent. And I'm just excited for what the future holds. It's not too little too late. It's we need to push more and continue to hold our respective companies accountable. And I'm ready to do that. I'm going to be at every town hall asking questions, asking for statistics, asking for numbers, and I'm excited about that.
That's amazing. Wow. I'm just like vibrating with energy, Vanessa. Thank you so much for sharing that, and just sharing your story and sharing all the tangible initiatives that you're pursuing. I hope, our audience here today feels the same way. And takes that as an inspiration in the work that they do. And you're so right. We all need to be doing so much more and in every opportunity, right? And I think it's also just a mindset, right? It's not just about a action, or perhaps, I should probably scratch that word strategy. Perhaps that's applicable at a corporate level, but at an individual level, I think it comes down to really who you are and what you become, and I think what you help others become. So thank you so much again, Vanessa, for the work you do in the world. This is amazing. I'm so excited to share this with the wider world very soon. And thank you again for joining us, and thanks to the audience for joining us as well. Thank you, Vanessa. And just once again, join us next week as well. We have our featured speaker from PwC, who, Vanessa, I'm going to ask similar questions to. It's a perfect segue to everything we talked about today, a corporate leader on the other side. That
would be great. I want to join that one.
Yes, we want to have you. We will absolutely have you. I'll make sure the invite is in your inbox.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and same for the others here in the room, the audience. Please join us next week as well. This is a continuation of this conversation today, and very timely when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and social justice. Right. Once again, my name is Navroop Sahdev, and I was joined today by Vanessa E. Full stop.
That's good. That's good.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.